Cardiff Speakers Club on the resourced National Health Service. Why is it that the National Health Service in South Wales is not fit for purpose? Let's look at the evidence. The number of beds in South Wales, particularly in the Cardiff area, has decreased by about 1,000 beds, ladies and gentlemen, in the last 10 years. So it's a bit like fitting a quart into a pint pot. It just doesn't go. And that, I think, sums up where we are with regard to the number of beds in the Cardiff and Vale NHS Trust. People go on playing politics with the National Health Service, which of course doesn't help. But let's look at the evidence. Take the number of beds in the University College Hospital. There's about 1,000 beds. Any day of the week, there's probably between 100 and 150 patients who are ready for discharge, but there's nowhere for them to go. There used to be euphemistically called bed blockers, but of course now modern management have re-termed them delayed discharges. So really nobody really knows what a delayed discharge is, other than the professionals who are looking after the place day to day. But the bottom line is they are sitting in a hospital costing probably up to £1,000 a day when they could be in a care home or in their own home, if somebody took an interest in creating and establishing adequate packages for them. So how does this impact on the rest of the hospital? Well, of course, the major centre for its impaction is the Accident and Emergency Department, who see probably 100 plus patients every day, usually more at the weekends, Friday night, Saturday and Sunday night. The Accident and Emergency Department is like a bear garden. It's the only best way of describing it. So, patients are waiting to be seen. They're on trolleys in the corridor. Their staff wasting time ringing around a ward. When's Mr. Bloggs going? Will he be going at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, in order that we can get patient Jones admitted to the ward? So that hassle goes on day after day and has been doing so for a number of years. So when the patients have got the corridors filled and all the cubicles in the department taken, when the next lot of ambulances come up, the patients cannot be admitted to the department. What happens? They have to stay in the ambulance. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you believe that the patients have to stay maybe for maybe an hour plus 2 hours, waiting in an ambulance in order to get through the door into the hospital to have their assessment? It's not right in this day and age. And of course, the difficulty is about getting patients to the ward is, if there's no beds in the ward, what can they do? So you get a kind of stalemate. So therefore, when there's a crisis in weather conditions or a bad flus in the winter, then all hell is let loose politically. Staff are ringing up the National Assembly. Edwina Hart will visit the hospital, always giving support. But the bottom line is they're not adequately resourcing areas for these patients to be discharged to. And that is really the bottom line. They're not fit for discharge. What about the ambulance service? Can you believe it that only 2 years ago they spent about 20 million buying about 10 or 12 new ambulances, which were urgently needed 5 years ago for looking after emergencies. And furthermore, and those of you who take the Echo will have read, they are now going to buy sat-navs. And of course we've heard a speech this morning about the value of sat-navs, but of course I do still think they would aid the South Ambulance, the ambulance service, in getting from A to B. Only last night, ladies and gentlemen, was a classic example of a 70-year-old man who dialed 5 times for the 999 call to get an ambulance to take his wife to hospital. Unfortunately, 2.5 hours later the ambulance arrived to take the lady to hospital, and she died 2 days later. I'm not saying that had the ambulance got there within the 8 minutes or 3 minutes it would have been any different, but that's a reflection of what can happen when the service is not smooth running and conforming to the agreed standards which has been set down. And of course what they do is, with regard to the ambulance service, they've changed their chief executive about 8 or 9 times in the last 4 or 5 years. But of course that is not the problem, it's just the middle management and the operation difficulties that has tended to contribute to this type of backlog. So that describes the influx of patients to the hospital. What should be, and if we even take the maternity department, they are too in crisis. Not enough midwives, and although the population of Cardiff is going down slightly, it is probably not going down now because the number of immigrants who have come into the Cardiff in the last 3 or 4 years, particularly from the Eastern European countries. Therefore, they have probably increased the population and the birth rate has gone up, but nobody is actually doing anything about it. Ladies and gentlemen, somebody somewhere at some time should take these issues on board and deal with them in order that we get for the future an excellent National Health Service in South Wales which is fit for purpose.